Brett. I'm the Next Gen pastor here at God First Voice, and we are in a series called Another Country, all about heaven. We looked at how God is going to bring a new earth, which we're going to dwell on forever. We looked at how this is all about the kingdom, and the kingdom is very much a now, but not yet. Now, today, we're going to look at the people of heaven. So if you're watching, you're in the right place, because you're going to find out whether you get to heaven or not. I've actually got the list of names. God gave it to me, and I'll read it out at the end, see if you make. I'm only kidding. Sorry, I think I might be fine. We're going to look at that today. And it's a very, as I read through this passage, it changed the way I looked at it before. So I'm actually going to read it again, let it sink in a bit, because it may be something that you're not expecting to come out of this passage, especially if you've got 1 Corinthians 13 and a poster on your wall, or if you used it at your wedding. I'm pretty sure I did. I think most people did. But I'm going to read it along, so we'll let it sink in. Now, eagerly desire the greater gifts. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I might boast, but do not have love, again, nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it's not proud, it does not dishonor others, it's not self-seeking, it's not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For now we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now, we see only a reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. Follow the way of love and eagerly desire the gifts of the Spirit, especially prophecy. Now, as I was saying, I read this very differently as I got into this. The thoughts of warm and fuzzies faded away, unfortunately. I mean, it's on the surface, it's a beautiful picture of love, and God's love, in fact. But when we look at the context of this, and when we look deeper into the verse, you can actually see it's a bit of an expose of our ugliness. And we're going to touch on that today. But of course, we're not going to stay there. So what is the context? First of all, this is a letter written by Paul. Now, Paul was a Christian missionary, but he wasn't always a Christian. In fact, he hated Christians. And he thought Jesus was a fraud. He thought Christians were heretics until he met Jesus. The risen, resurrected Jesus And then he realized that Jesus is who he said he is. And then he spent the rest of his days proclaiming the gospel, planting churches all around, mainly the sort of the northern parts of the Mediterranean rim. And the church in Corinth was one of those churches that Paul planted. Now, Corinth is in Greece, and in fact, it was one of their main cities at the time. It was, and as all big cities do, they attract the best of the best. So really, that's who was in Corinth. It was all the gifted, the talented, the best of the best, as I said. But Corinth was also notorious. They had, the Greeks had a polytheistic religion, and there were many temples in Corinth. And one of the temples was the temple to Aphrodite, one of their gods. And in fact, in the temple, at one stage, there were 1,000, that's a sort of an artist's view of the temple of Aphrodite. And at one stage, there were 1,000 priestesses in that temple. And when you hear priestess, also hear prostitute, because that was part of their religion. And this is just an example of the kind of society that Corinth was in. There was a lot of, as I said, it was notorious. There was a lot of very interesting things, shall we say, that went on in Corinth. In fact, they were so bad that the Greeks coined a phrase. So to be sexually immoral was to Corinthianize. That's actually what the Greeks would say. You would Corinthianize if you were sexually immoral. That's how bad Corinth was and the kind of reputation it had. So that is the place where Paul went and planted this church. And these are the people who he was spreading the gospel to. And you'll find as you read through the book of Corinthians, it almost seemed like they lived a double life. They were highly gifted and spiritual gifts included. They were very gifted and they were action orientated in terms of their Christian faith. But on the other hand, they seem to have lost the plot. There was all sorts of strife and ugliness that was going on. There was pride and anger and dissension and all sorts of things going on in the church. And I just wanted to go back, because I think it's important knowing the context of this 1 Corinthians 13, because just about everything that Paul mentions in this part of love actually comes from earlier on in the letter, where Paul was actually chastising the people of Corinth. So I've just given Barbara just a few examples. The first one is in 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 3. Look what Paul says. For you are still of the flesh, for while there is jealousy and strife among you, are you not of the flesh and behaving only in a human way? Chapter 4, verse 6, he says, I've applied all these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, brothers, that you may learn by us not to go beyond what is written, the scriptures, that none of you may be puffed up in favor of one against another. Look at 1 Corinthians 5, verse 2. He says, and you are arrogant. Ought you not to rather mourn? Let who has done this be removed from you. 8 verse 1. Now concerning food offered to idols, we know that all of us possess knowledge. We thought the inverted commas things was a millennial thing. Actually, looks like Paul started it. He says, this knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Corinthians 11:18, he says, for in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you. And I believe it in part. And you can just quickly look at, I just did a quick, a cross-reference. And these are all the verses that came up with in terms of Paul chastising the Corinthian church in this chapter 13. And when he's talking about love, he's actually pointing out the ugliness inside of us. Now, you may be watching this, who knows, and you may not be a believer, or maybe you were a churchgoer, but you left church because you think, oh man, Christians are just hypocrites. They say one thing, they do another thing. Well, let me say, firstly, I get you. And secondly, you're in the right place. I'm glad you're here this morning, because we see that Paul gives an antidote to that. He gives an antidote to this ugliness that pervades society, and sadly, sometimes it even pervades the church, as we see it here. So what is the antidote? Well, let's look at the problem first, because in 1 Corinthians 13, I believe Paul shows us the problem, and then he shows us the solution. But before we get to the solution, what is the problem? Well, let me illustrate part of the problem like this. If you, in a group photo, let's say it's a class photo, let's say it's a photo at a party, or some sort of gathering, who is the first person you look at in the photo? It's you, right? And that's kind of what Paul's talking about. Also, here's another. If you have children, you'll be able to answer this. Do you have to teach children to be good, or do you have to teach children to misbehave? Sure, tough one. We have to teach them to behave. Why? Because sadly, we are born sinful, right? We are born self-centered. It's all about me. And I think Paul is exposing this problem in this chapter. Let's look at, one of the beauties of the Christian faith is that it's open to anyone, regardless of your gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic situation, geography, where you live, where you're from, what country you're from. It is for everyone, and that is such a beauty of Christian. And in fact, it's unique among world religions in that sense, that it's so broad. However, that's also a bit of a messy part of Christianity, Christian, right? And that includes hypocrites. It includes people who used to attend the temple of Aphrodite. It includes everyone. So of course there's going to be some sort of interesting things that come out in a church context. But Paul gives us a solution. So let's look at verses 1 to 3 to see how Paul shows us what the issue is. He says, if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I'm nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast. Do not have love, I gain nothing. You see, we can do all these fantastic things. In fact, what we do can be completely meaningless. It's worth nothing. But how is that possible? I mean, how can you do all these amazing things? I mean, prophecy comes from God, right? Things like that. But we can still miss the point, and we'll see that a little bit later. Because Paul is pointing to something going on in our heart. What is going on in our heart? Not on the outside, not what people can see, but at the level of the heart. What is going on there? Now, I gained a lot of wisdom from an American preacher, name of Tim Keller, and he quotes Charles Spurgeon, who is probably, he's called the Prince of Preachers. He was probably one of the best preachers ever. And he gave this illustration for this point in terms of our hearts and the works that we do. So he spoke about a gardener in a kingdom long ago. Now, this gardener pulled out the biggest carrot ever. I mean, this thing was massive. And he was so proud of this carrot. So what he did is he went to the king. He sought audience with the king, and he brought his carrot along. And he gave it to the king, and he said, you know what? This is the biggest produce I've ever produced and will ever produce. I'll never produce anything like this again. But I want to give this to you as a token of my appreciation, as a token of my love, because you're such a great king. Here, please accept this gift. And then he turned to go home back to his garden. But the king stopped him. He said, hold on. This is a great gift. And I can see your heart. I trust you. So you know what? I have a large piece of land next to your garden. I'm going to give you that land because I trust you. I want you to do whatever you want with that land. Make it into a garden, whatever you want. That land is yours. Now, there was a nobleman in the court that day who sort of scratched his chin and thought, wow, for a carrot, he gets how many acres of land? I wonder. So the next day, the nobleman comes in with this beautiful thoroughbred horse, massive thing, comes into the king's court. And he says, O king, I breed horses. This is the finest and biggest and most excellent horse I've ever bred or ever will breed. I want to give this to you as a token of my appreciation and love because you're such a great king. The king saw through it straight away. He said, you know what? The gardener who gave me the carrot, he gave the carrot to me. But this horse you bring before me today, you're giving it to yourself. And Spurgeon explains that whenever we give, even amazing things, we give of prophecies of God, or we give to the poor, or we give of service to God, whenever we do it, and it's not out of love for God, but it's because we want some recognition. We want God to favor us. We want God to bless us. We want God to heal us. We want. Then guess what? It becomes about us. And Spurgeon said, you can clothe the naked, feed the poor, but if you're doing it for recognition, you're feeding yourself and you're clothing yourself. And I think this is what Paul was pointing out to us in this verse. You see, it's all about a change of heart. And that's what God looks at. Let's look at verses 10 to 12. Because Paul doesn't just tell us what the problem is. He actually gives us a solution, of course. Let's read that together. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. When completeness comes, is talking about the end of life and time as we know it, and when we are to be in heaven with Jesus. And Paul is pointing us to a future hope. You know, a mirror in those days wasn't like the mirrors we have nowadays. Of course, you couldn't see very well. You could see, but not very well. And that's why he talks about, well, you see dimly now, but then you will see face to face. You see, it is all about intimacy with God. That, I believe, is what Paul is calling us to. How do we have this change of heart? How do we do all these things? How do we live not for ourselves, not to gain recognition and for people to just be impressed with us, but how do we live for God? Well, I believe Paul is saying we need an intimacy with God. You see, I mean, I can see everyone here on the screen. And I know some of you well, and I know some of you as a high, and that's great. I mean, we're all here, but we don't know each other. Like if I grab a coffee with one of you, that's a face-to-face. So I see you every week on Zoom, and I think, yeah, there's Reagan, who always calls himself Mita, and you know, there's the Andrew and family. Those guys are always cool, and of course there's Heather and Trevor, who are just so faithful. They always share every week. They make us tea and coffee. But I mean, that's all I know until we meet face to face, until I grab a coffee with you. And man, I start to really get to know you. I mean, I get to know what makes you tick, what you're passionate about. Are you the person who I just assumed you were just by looking at you? Or is there something much more? Is there something completely different, in fact, about you? I get to know you. And then when I see you on the screen, I wonder, you know, how's that homeschooling going? You know, with Mike and Reagan, gosh, you know, those guys are such legends, you know. Andrew, who looks after his family, and the family all live, you know, really close together, and they always are with each other. Gosh, you know, sometimes wish my family was like that. You know, that's face to face. And Paul is saying we know in part now, but we will know face to face. And I think there are two sort of solutions, if you like, to this self-centeredness that we suffer from, I guess. One is understanding the grace of God, like really grasping God's goodness to us. And the other is that the hope that one day we will be face to face with the living God. I mean, think about that. Those, I think, are the solutions. Now, we crave recognition and appreciation and esteem. And that's kind of why we do the things we do very often. You know, why I give to the poor is I can drop it into a conversation. Oh, yeah, you know, shame. I gave 20 grand to, you know, the Live Foundation. this month. They really, and then it's amazing. It makes me feel good. And people look up to me and think, wow, that guy gives. Or I can prophesy in church and think, ooh, people will think, how holy is Brett? Wow. And that's my motivation. And I do that because I crave esteem. I do. It's the essence of my humanity. I crave to be loved and to be important. That's who I want to be. And some of us who are fed up with the hypocrites of church will enjoy this verse, but for me it's very sobering. So Barbara's going to put up Matthew 7 and verse 22 for us. On that day, and that's the day of our Lord, or Judgment Day, the day we get to meet Jesus face to face. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Now, I think that is the key, the word know. It's in 1 Corinthians 13. Now I know in part, then I will fully know as I am fully known. And then Jesus says there, I never knew you. Now that may not make a lot of sense if you're thinking know is sort of a knowledge about, I've read up on you, or I understand you. But know, both in the Greek and Hebrew, has a much deeper meaning and actually implies relationship, and it implies deep relationship and knowing. And that is the key. That is the key. And man, it's opened my eyes. It's opened my eyes. We are to know God as he knows us. It's a beautiful thing. But we don't seek intimacy with God very often, do we? We're on our own mission. And then every now and then it sneaks in, that self-centeredness sneaks in, and we want to do this to get recognition. We want to do that. But fortunately, God seeks us, and he seeks us relentlessly. And we get to know him when we spend time with him. Now, psychologically and emotionally, in relationships, we have this need. Now, what happens is, if somebody doesn't really know us, but loves us, I mean, it's okay, but it's not great, right? I mean, it's like, well, you don't know me, right? Or if somebody knows you but doesn't love you, also not great. We need to be loved. But if someone knows you and loves you, that is fulfilling. Now, Paul points out that we are fully known by God. And in many places, Scripture tells us we are fully loved, including this verse, by God. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that where we should get our esteem from? What we crave from so many other places. I mean, who better than God to be loved by, loved completely? And that, I think, is what the antidote to the self-centeredness is intimacy, deep intimacy with God. Because although he knows us, and that's not always a comfortable thing, certainly not for me. I mean, the more and more I realize how much God knows me, I mean, I can suppress and repress till the cows come home. But God sees through that, and he knows me. He knows my heart. Romans 8 says, even while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. So picture that. On the cross, Jesus takes on your sin, dies for you. He cries out, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? Because the Father turns his face from his Son, so that we one day can be face to face with the living God. How amazing is that? How amazing is that? We have a future hope of being face to face with the living God, and that is what motivates us. That is what motivates us. That love that God first showed us is the love that we use to prophesy, to give to the poor, and so on. We love with his love. Isn't that a beautiful picture? So I encourage you today that we seek God. We seek intimacy with God. When we read the word, don't read what you want to read into it. Let God speak to you. Seek him. Seek intimacy with him. When you pray, don't pray about the things that you want all the time. Yes, we can. And that's just his love. But I would encourage us to just seek God. Just lift him up. Think about how great he is. And just meditate on that. I mean, meditate on the greatness of God and the love of God. More and more and more. So it becomes less about us and more about him. Our lives. So what is heaven going to be like? Well, what are the people of heaven going to be like? Well, we're going to be face to face with God. God knows us fully, as we've seen, and then we will fully know God. I mean, how amazing is that? How incredible. And because we fully know God, we'll be fully transformed. There'll be no strife, no pride, no anger, no dissension. I mean, nothing like that. Because we will be in intimate relationship with God and with each other. That is the people of heaven, and that is what I believe Paul is showing us today. But it's not only heaven, as Ryan pointed out to us last week. It starts now. The kingdom of God started on Jesus' coming and death and resurrection. So it starts now. I mean, can we get into an intimate relationship with God now? Yes, we can. It starts now. Can we start to live that out in our lives? Yes, we can. Yes, we can. My prayer, I mean, certainly for myself, and I'm not being falsely humble. My prayer is that I start that now. I was very convicted by this, very. And I pray that we can, as a church, start to live this out. Seek God, seek intimacy with God, and then live it out in our lives.